Hold on. Okay,
Okay.
you're good to go.
Good morning and welcome to our second free of the 2 free weeks at Beit Shemesh Matan. I'm trying to read the thing. I don't remember what it's called. Okay, hello. Okay, so welcome to all of you who are here. Welcome to all of you who are listening. And we are just going to be continuing what we did last week. What I did last week, I don't know, those of you who are joining us today, whether you caught up on last week or didn't catch up on last week. What we did last week was basically a recap of the last bit of what we did last year, at the end of last semester before I got cut off to go to Miluim. So we are going to be picking up the strand now that we've finished with all our backtracking, where we left off at the end of the last semester and start from Melachim Aleph Perek Tetvav, and that's where we're going to be heading right now. Okay, so I'm going to share. I hope you could see, those of you who are on your phone. I hope you'll be able to see this. Here we go. No?
Okay, let's see.
Yeah. Okay. Good. Perek Tetvav. ובשנת 18 למלך ירבעם בנבט, Malach Aviyam al Yehuda. I'm reminding you that we're doing the back and forth synchronizing between the northern kings and the southern kings. Yerovam ben Nevat was the first of the northern kings, and he became king at the same time, more or less, or very few weeks maybe after Rechavam became king in Yerushalayim. So now we hear that after Yerovam was king for 18 years, and Rechavam in the middle, at some point died, his son, Aviyam, Rechavam's son, is now became king on Yehuda. Okay, so this is our southern king. Now we have, instead of Yerovam Rechavam, now we have Yerovam Rechavam's son, Aviyam. Shalosh shanim malach b'Yerushalayim. His whole entire reign of this Aviyam was only 3 years. V'shem imo Ma'acha bat Avishalom. His mother's name is mentioned, as we said, in Melchei Yehuda. I want to say something else about this business of mentioning the mother's name, which we never have in the Northern Kingdom. There was an institution also in other cultures, but certainly also in Israel, called the Gvira. Not clear if the Gvira refers to the queen or the king's mother, but it is some royal woman in the palace who is not herself the queen, who has a special stature, not only of great respect and her own throne and whatever, but apparently she also had some sort of say in political matters. In other words, she was I don't know if an advisor, but her opinion was considered. She had some sort of political power. So it's possible that, just one hypothesis, that the mothers of all the kings are mentioned in regarding the kings of the southern kingdom and not regarding the kings of the northern kingdom, maybe not only because the south is more important, but maybe also because in the south, this institute of the Gvira, if it's the king's mother, played a greater part than in the northern kingdom. So it's important for us actually to know who this woman was who had some sort of sway over the king. Maybe. Close parenthesis. Now we're talking back about Aviyam. Vayelech bechol chato.
Wait.
Yes.
I'm sorry. My husband is free now. Could you give me 2 minutes to try if I can work it out on Zoom, David? I can't get the audio in the Zoom to work. Do you hear me? You still hear me twice?
But I think we hear you from the phone and not from the computer.
Oh, I muted you in the wrong place.
Yeah, you muted the computer.
Unmute the computer. You have to unmute on the computer. You're muted.
Melissa, you can't unmute her?
She doesn't hear us again.
Okay.
There you go.
Thank you for your patience.
Okay, you can hear us now?
Yes.
Okay, yeah.
Okay, we're all good. We're not doubled. We're not anything. Okay.
Okay.
Baruch Hashem, let's go back. Oh, yeah, put the recording on because Adina was going to say something.
Yeah, it's recorded.
Yeah.
It's recording. I turned it back on.
Good. Welcome back. We're okay. Any questions, or you just wanted to ask about the? Okay, good.
I never heard this about the Gvira. It's very interesting. Thank you.
Okay, good. Then we're done. We can go home now. Vayelech bechol chatot aviv asher asa lefanav, and he went according to all the sins. He did all the sins that his father did. His father being Rechavam. Okay. Velo haya levavo shalem im Hashem Elohav ki levav David aviv, and he wasn't a good Jew. Okay, and we said last time and many other times in the past that Melachim has this gold standard, right, in the southern kings of David, and all kings are measured up against David. Are they as good as David? Not as good as David? And all kings in the northern kingdom, I don't know if you want to call it a gold standard or a whatever, a poopy standard, of Yerovam ben Nevat, who's the bad guy, right? And it's not, are you as good as are you as bad as Yerovam? So the northern kings are going to be as bad, not as bad, almost as bad as Yerovam, and the kings in the southern kingdom are going to be as good, not as good, almost as good as David. Okay, that's just the stick, right, by which you measure kings. So here we have Lo Yalevo Shalem El Shem Elohav Kilva David Aviv. Seems to me, I think, a little bit more parav than Vayelech Bechol Chatot Aviv Asher Asa Lefanav. In other words, if you want to say that Rechavam was really terrible, he was an idolater, he was, put everything on the list that you want to put there, then following that with, and his heart wasn't as perfect as David, doesn't fit, right? Because obviously, if he did everything bad that Rechavam did, obviously he was not as good as David, right? Because David is, right, the best. So I think even just this pasuk makes us wonder, like, what does he do? And I think that part of what's going on here, and I said this, I think, last time about Yerovam, part of what's going on here is that the author here is using the formula, right? There's always the formulaic comparison to David and to Yerovam, good or bad, right? So when you say Lo haya levo shalem im Hashem Elohav ki levav David aviv, that's his evaluation. He wasn't as good as David aviv. That you have to put that in because you have to mention it. Now we have to see really if, like, which one is off. Either Rechavam was really, really terrible, in which case the comparison to David here is just, I don't know, some sort of throwaway formulaic line that doesn't give us any information. Or Rechavam was not that terrible, right? And so Aviam was not that terrible. He just wasn't as good as David, as the standard of David. Okay, so that we're going to have to look in a minute and see what we actually know about Rechavam. But before we go back to Rechavam, I just want to continue here this last two psukim. This is like a written in a bracketed. Okay, since we're mentioning David, let's say something else about David, which has nothing to do with our story now, but we're talking about David. Kileman David. I keep forgetting that you don't see my cursor. I'm sorry. A moment. How do I do this? Here we go. Kileman David, Natan Hashem Elohav lo nir b'Yerushalayim, la'akim et beno acharav la'amid et Yerushalayim, because of how wonderful David was. God gave him a dynasty and established the Davidic. The son will become king, and then the next son. So, in other words, the only reason why, according to this, Aviam is king is because God promised this dynasty to David. Why was David so wonderful? Asher asa David te'ashar b'nei Hashem, because David did what was right in God's eyes. V'losar mikol asher tzivau, and didn't stray one way or the other his entire life. He was, a paragon of perfection. Rak bidvar Uriah Hiti, except for that small incident of murder and incest and adultery and whatever. Okay, so other than that, we're all good. Okay, so that was a bracket about.
That's not the only thing he did. He tried to get Uriah to sleep with her so that the baby would.
Cover up.
a cover-up.
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
not just murder, you know.
I think murder is a little bit worse, and adultery is a little bit worse than trying to cover up your mistakes. But we can argue about that.
Yeah.
In any case, we're left with this question of how bad or how not bad was Aviam. Now we're told that he was not as good as David. Okay, that doesn't mean anything. But he's as bad. He did everything that his sins that his father does. So let's just go back a half a parak and see what it is that we know about Rechavam. Okay, so now we're going back to the end of the previous parak before Rechavam died. And we hear, I just want to reread what we know about Rechavam. Rechavam ben Shlomo Melech B'Yerushalayim.
Melech
Ben,
Yehuda.
Yehuda, I'm sorry, you're right. Melech Yehuda. He was king of Yehuda. Ben 41 shana Rechavam b'Melchu. He was 41 when he became king. Ushvais Shana Melech B'Yerushalayim. This actually works very well with what we read before, that Yeravam was king for 18 years before Aviam became king. Because now we hear that he was 17 years a king, Rechavam. So the 18th year, right, because Tanakh doesn't take into account half years. If it's one day into the next year, it's already a year. Okay, so that fits. So he was king for 17 years. Malach b'Yerushalayim asher ha'ir asher bachar Hashem lasumet Moshe mikol shivtei Israel. Okay, an elaborate way to say Yerushalayim, right? This is God's chosen place. And Rechavam, we know his mother's name was Naamah ha'Ammonit. Okay. Vayas Yehuda hara be'enei Hashem. And the people of Yehuda
Oh,
were bad. They were worse than all their predecessors, than all their ancestors, the people of Yehuda. What did they do? They built these high places, which we said may or may not be illegitimate. I mean, they're certainly illegitimate, but they may or may not be idolatry. They may just be illegitimate ways of worshiping Hashem. Al kol givag voha v'tachat kol etz ra'anan. That's already idolatry. Okay, so here the people of Yehuda strayed off the derech. V'gam kadesh haya ba'aretz, another idolatrous practice. Asu kechol to'agaot hagoyim asher orish Hashem mipnei bnei Yisrael. Okay, so what do we know here about Rechavam? All we know about Rechavam that he was king over these people. We don't have any here that says and Rechavam was terrible. Okay, now
I made that mistake.
You're not the only
I made
one.
that mistake when I read the parak very quickly, and instead of seeing Vayas Yehuda hara, in my head it was Vayas
And
Rechavam.
I don't think that that's a mistake that you made because you were misreading or because you read too quickly. I would like to propose that is a mistake that you made because the author wanted you to make that mistake.
Okay.
Okay? I think it is purposely written in a way that you're reading Yehuda, but back of like the formula. So since we're talking about Rechavam, you expect that the word okay. And I think that's a very clever way to like catch it from both ends. I think what the author here is trying to tell us is like this: Rechavam was not an idolater. He wasn't a good king as far as kingly skills went. He was a lousy king. He lost the whole kingdom, right? But was he a good Jew or a bad Jew? Can't tell from this. What I can tell from this, I think, if we want to read the double take that the author is trying to feed us here, is that he's king. And if you're king, you're responsible for what's going on in your kingdom. And if they built all these things, then he as king should have torn them down immediately. Okay? So I think it's less a personal, Rechavam, you are a bad man, and more, Rechavam, you are a bad king, because as God's given ruler on your people, you should have made sure that the people toe the line. And I think he's really being blamed hard for this. And I think that may be what is reflected in Perek Tetvav, when we hear that of his son Aviam did all the horrible things that he did. Maybe it means idolatry, all right? Maybe it means that his son Aviam also didn't stop all these idolatrous practices. Or maybe it means Rechavam was bad because he didn't stop them, and Aviam was bad because as a natural consequence, he became an idolater. Okay, I don't think it's really clear. Okay, I just pointing out how nicely we get fed these things. Now, we're going to see, I think, very often in this course that it's very instructive to sometimes compare to what we have in Divrei Hayamim. Divrei Hayamim Chronicles is a book, not two books, Aleph Bet, but it's a book, just like Melachim Aleph Bet, a book. It's a book that was written after they came back from Galut Bavel, during Second Temple period. Okay, so that was written at least 75, let's say, plus, it could have been, 275 years after they came back to Israel. And Divrei Hayamim more or less follows the story that we have in Tanakh, in the rest of Tanakh. It takes 12 chapters, the first 12 chapters of Divrei Hayamim takes us from Briat HaOlam, from Adam HaRishon, until Shaul HaMelech. It just chronicles this person, this 1 second, this person, this person, this person, and from Perek Yud Bet and on, Yud Gimel and on, then it starts actually telling the stories of the kingdoms, where it almost entirely ignores, I'll tell in a minute, almost entirely ignores the northern kingdom. And as far as the southern kingdom is concerned, it almost entirely ignores, let's say, David's sins. Okay, so it's a very agenda-based book. Yes, Adina, you want to say something?
No, I thought it also ignored Yetziat Mitzrayim.
That comes way before.
I know,
Okay?
but
It doesn't tell any stories until Shaul.
No, but I thought you said it started from the beginning.
It started from the beginning, but doesn't tell any stories. It just gives chronicles. Adam, Shet, Enosh. Like it gives you a list of people. And these sons, and these are these
But
sons.
it doesn't say
No
Moshe.
story.
It doesn't say.
It says Moshe. It says Moshe was Amram's son, and it says Moshe's, I think it says mentions Moshe's children, but it doesn't tell you anything about him. There's no stories. Okay. The first real story is the death of Shaul in the war against Plishtim. And then it moves on to David. And from David, it tells the story from the perspective of the southern kingdom. And the agenda, we're going to see that in a minute, but the agenda, it's written, everybody knew Sefer Melachim. So the fact, let me backtrack. Let me just speak before everybody knew it. It does not repeat Sefer Melachim. It doesn't just omit the northern kingdom and omit most of David's sins. Sometimes it's verbatim. Sometimes it just omits. Sometimes it adds stuff like speeches and whatever, and you can say, okay, so maybe Yirmiyahu didn't want to write that in Sefer Melachim, but sometimes it gives you a completely different picture. Sometimes it contradicts what says in Sefer Melachim. Now, if you go back to the fact that the people who were reading or hearing Chronicles knew Sefer Melachim, right? There must be something to that because they're not stupid, right? And they wouldn't accept, I think, and obviously accept it because it's in our canon, right? They wouldn't accept a book that is full of mistakes, right? How can you tell me that so-and-so happened when I read in Sefer Melachim about the same so-and-so that the opposite happened, right? So there must be a deeper or different reason for having written Chronicles the way it was written. And one of the things I think that Chronicles is trying to do is it's trying to look at all the events that are recorded in Sefer Melachim from the perspective of Beit Sheni, of we have to rehabilitate. Because if we look at Sefer Melachim as written by Yirmiyahu, it's also agenda-based. I mean, almost anytime you write a history, it's going to be agenda-based, right? Also, Yirmiyahu didn't write everything, and he chose what to say and what to not say. But the point or the goal of Sefer Melachim, I think you can't argue with the fact that the goal of Sefer Melachim is to show us how we got from point A, Melachim Aleph Pasuk Aleph, till point B, end of Melachim, Churban, destruction and exile. And according to the prism that Sefer Melachim, the author, is feeding us, it's theology. Right? Because we didn't listen to God, because we were idolatrous, because we didn't deserve to be here on religious grounds, look how it happened. God tolerated it only for so long. At some point, toleration was over and we got kicked out, right? And then when you come back to Sefer Divrei Hayamim, people came back to Israel, and there was no Beit HaMikdash at the beginning, and there was no Nevuah by the time Chronicles was written. and there was no Urim and Tumim, and there was no Aron, and there was no Ruach, I don't know if there's Ruach HaKodesh. People must have wondered during the time, we talked about this last 2 years ago in Shivat Zion, people must have wondered whether all this God stuff was still relevant. In other words, the fact that there was the destruction of Beit HaMikdash in Yerushalayim, the fact that the people were exiled, was that because God lost the war against Bavel and therefore God is no longer relevant? Or God chose to exile us and destroy his city? Now let's go with the better option, with the religious option, okay? What Yirmiyahu was telling us all along. No, God is very relevant. God didn't lose. You deserve that, okay? But even then, we have to split it into two. We deserve that, and that's it. God is not interested. We broke off the brit, so he broke off the brit, and so, God is very relevant, just we're not relevant to him anymore. And so what's the point of being in Israel? What's the point of doing all God's work? And like, it's a farce because God doesn't want us anymore. Or there is such a thing as tshuva, and there is such a thing as renewal of the brit. And God wants us back again now that we served our time in Galut, right? And Chronicles is coming from that standpoint and saying, look, you were terrible, but God wants you back. And so let's look at the good part of what happened. And let me show you how wonderful David and Beit David was, and God wants David and Beit David to reinstitute. You know what? Beit HaMikdash that we're fighting now to build Beit Sheni, which is a very poor replica, let's say, of what Beit Rishon was. No, that's what God wants, and look how wonderful it is, and that. Okay, and second of all, we read in Sefer, we know from Torah, right? We read Yud Gimel Midot. We just read it many times over the past month. Poked avon avot al banim, which means, and when we say Yud Gimel Midot, I think we skipped that part, right? Notzer chesed. Okay, I'm blanking out. No, Nosei avon v'pesha, right? V'chata'a v'nakeh, right? We stop at v'nakeh. We don't say v'nakeh lo yinakeh poked avon avot al banim. We don't continue with that part when we say it as, in our tefillah, as God will not erase our sins. God will continue to visit the sins of the fathers on the children, which is what it says. Poked avon avot al banim. We will pay for our forefathers' sins. That theology changed at the time of the Churban, such that Yechezkel, who was the Navi, who was one of the first contingent that left to Bavel, right, in Beit Rishon, in Perek Yudchet in Sefer Yechezkel, he changes that theology and says Ish bechet o yumat. Okay, this is new. No longer, according to Yechezkel, are we to pay for our forefathers' sins. We are all responsible for our own deeds. Right? I'm going to say something about that in parenthesis in a minute. Which is why Divrei Yamim wants to say maybe it doesn't matter if they sinned or they didn't sin back then in Beit Rishon, the story in Sefer Melachim. That's not the point, okay? The point is we have to do good because God cares about us. And so it's going to reframe the stories in Sefer Melachim to show that if a person sinned, only that person is going to get punished. And if he got punished, that means there must have been some sort of sin that he personally did that led up to that punishment. Because according to the theology of Divrei Yamim, you can't have one person punished for somebody else's sins. That works? Well, okay, understand? What I wanted to say in parenthesis is that I'm not really sure how that works with Zchut Avot. Like, on the one hand, we want to say we don't want to pay for our forefathers' sins. On the other hand, we do say that we want to gain credit on their behalf, right? I remember my oldest daughter's bat mitzvah, when I told my husband that I'm very uncomfortable about him saying Baruch sheptaranu me'onsho shel zeh, right? And her bat mitzvah, because all my other children, of course, as well, but she was the first, I'm using her as an example. She was so fantastic that I figured that if I'm not, I don't care about blaming for her sins. She doesn't have any sins, but people keep telling me how wonderful my daughter was, and I'm getting all this credit. And if I say Baruch Sheb'taranu, I no longer have the right to claim anything of hers. Like, I don't want to say that. I'll take her sins, fine. But let me keep her credit. So I'm not sure how it works in what we're doing today, where we say ish bechet o yumat, but zchut avot tagen aleinu. But that's a different question, and close bracket. Okay, so let us see what Divrei Hayamim has to say about this story, given all that introduction. In Divrei Hayamim bet Yud bet, we hear like this: Vayhi kahachin malchut Rechavam, when he became king. U kechezkato, we hear this word kechezkato also in Divrei Hayamim about Uziyahu, who also got punished. Kechezkato, as he became strong and powerful. Azav et Torah Hashem, v'chol Yisrael imo. Now, we don't have this in Sefer Melachim, as we saw. We had the Kol Yisrael azvu et Torah Hashem. But Divrei Hayamim here is specifically saying, no, the bad part, the whatever, Rechavam was also part of this chet. And I assume that Divrei Hayamim was doing this because if Rechavam gets punished, and we know that he does get punished, here we go. Vayhi b'shana chamishit lamelech Rechavam, and during his 5th year, when he was king, Allah shishak melech Mitzrayim al Yerushalayim ki ma'alu ba'Hashem. In other words, when he was in his 5th year of reign, the Egyptian king Shishak, and we know this, we also have extra biblical sources that tell us this, came up against Yerushalayim and basically emptied all the treasuries, and that's certainly a punishment. Right? And if it's a punishment, then according to Divrei Hayamim, he deserved it. Okay? But if you look at the end of this, the worst that Divrei Hayamim could come up with is Vayas hara. What is the ra that he did? Ki lo hichin libo lidrosh et Hashem. He didn't consult with God. He wasn't, I don't know, what lidrosh et Hashem. He wasn't. Okay, so he wasn't a big tzaddik. But I think that's a little bit different, right, from the. So the reason I'm bringing this up, it's not such an important point about whether Aviam was as bad as Rechavam, whether Rechavam was. I think that may be interesting, but I think it's more interesting, at least from my point of view, it's more interesting to see how these two books are crafting the stories in order to forward their agendas, like to make it internally consistent, and more or less stick to the facts. But color it in such a way that works with whatever message they're trying to give us.
If I could say something.
You have more right than anybody else at the moment.
Because I'm here. Last week when I was listening to your class and I went to, and I looked up Rechavam, it just reminded me of Paro. And I did see there's a comparison. The way when Bnei Israel complained to Paro about the oil, and he makes it even worse for them. And that's what Rechavam did with the representatives of the 10 tribes.
Yes,
And
but
then came and complained about the oil of the Misim, and he says, I'm going to make it even worse because he listened to his friends and not to this Kenim. So it echoes about Paro. That's a pretty bad comparison.
Yes, totally. And thank you for that comparison. I just want to point out that specific issue falls under the category of politically, he's a bad king.
Yeah.
It doesn't fall under the category of religiously, he's a bad king.
Why? If he's evil?
That was not a sin against God. That was a sin against the people. What Rechavam did by taxing them was a lousy move. It was awful politically. He lost all these people, but that was not a sin against God.
I don't know. To be mean and cruel to me is a sin against God too.
Yeah, well, if you do that, all ben adam lechavero sins are a sin against God. You slap your friend in the face, that's a sin against God, right? Because that's not how a godly person is supposed to behave, right? But if you want to perhaps artificially break down the categories between ben adam lechavero, ben adam makom, right? Rechavam did not go against any technical or even ruach halacha Torah commandment. He didn't do anything ritually, religiously.
Nice. I think a Torah commandment is to be nice. I don't know.
Yeah, because but the Torah commands us also. Yes, he went against the Ben Adam L'Chavero thing, but Melachim is judging us. No. What the mistake that you made in Melachim before had you view Rechavam as an idolater,
Yeah.
and that even if you compare him to Paro, and you could say as far as a personal person, that's a horrible comparison because that's awful. That still doesn't reflect on his whether he's an idolater or not.
Okay.
Which for Melachim is a very important point. Because if you're an idolater, you're blacklisted. If not, you're going to get whatever punishments you're going to get. Your people are going to leave you and they're going to rebel against you, but God may still love you. Okay. I want to show you a scary slide. This is a scary slide. Okay. This is the next parak in Divrei Yamim. I put the whole entire parak here. Parak Yud Gimel, the next parak after what we just read about Rechavam. And the reason that I want to bring this, also because I think it is a good illustration of what I was talking before about the agenda of Divrei Yamim. But also to read between the lines and see, what other judgment the Baal Divrei Yamim has to say about Aviam. Okay, now we're talking about Aviam before we go back to Sefer Melachim. Sefer Melachim, you can't read it without Divrei Yamim. So here we go. I'm going to read this quickly. I'm going to translate this quickly. Please, Adina, raise your hand or cut me off if I'm going too quickly or if something's not clear. Okay. B'Shmonat 18 LaMelech Yerovam. We know this already. Vayimloch Aviyah al Yerushalayim. The name change shouldn't bother us. There are slight name changes.
Yerushalayim. That's Yehuda.
I keep saying that.
Good.
Thank you. I keep making that mistake.
You see.
Yeah. Thank you. Okay. I was caught up in the Aviyah. He's here called Aviyah and not Aviyam. That should not bother us. Okay. Divrei Yamim is hundreds of years later, and some of the names get changed. Uziyahu is Azariyahu, whatever. Thank you for that correction about Yehuda. Okay. Shalosh shanim malach b'Yerushalayim v'shem imo Michayu bat Uriel, different mother name, whatever. Min giva u'milchama hayta ben Aviyah uven Yerovam. Okay, here we hear, which we're going to hear again once we go back to Sefer Melachim, that there was war between Aviyah of the southern kingdom and Yerovam of the northern kingdom. I think I was talking about that last time, about the whole split and how tragic it is, the relationship, the poor relationship between the north and the south, but every once in a while became okay, and we acted as one people, and we acted as one people. We're a strong kingdom, but Yehuda is a very, very tiny kingdom on its own. And if it adds the northern kingdom to its whole list of other enemies, and we know what neighborhood we're living in, right? That's shooting yourself in the foot. Okay. Sometimes the war was just passive aggressive, like in the time of Yerovam and Rechavam, it was more, I think, passive, right? As Yerovam had to do everything to make sure that he keeps his kingdom. So he's going to invent a new religion. He's going to build new shrines to keep his little territory, not necessarily because he had anything against the southern territory. Maybe he did, but more because he wanted to make sure that he keeps his kingdom strong. Fine. But sometimes it reaches the point of civil war. And we're going to see that, sadly, in more than one case, where Jews from the north and Jews from the south killed each other, right? Lahavdil, the civil war in America, very tragic. So here there was a war between Aviyah and Yerovam. Now we're talking about civil war. Okay, it's describing the first of these civil wars. I also want to remind you, in the previous, we didn't do this last week, but we did this at the end of the previous semester when we were talking about Rechavam, and the people of the north said less taxes, and he said, no, I'm going to give you more taxes, right? And he lost the kingdom. And the next thing you hear is he gathers his army to quash the rebellion, to go against the northern kingdom, and the Navi comes to him and says, don't do that, and he calls them off. And that was really a point in Rechavam's favor. Okay, it was, once again there was this temptation to go to civil war, and because the Navi, and I'm giving Rechavam a lot of credit for this, he did not fight to get his kingdom back. He just left it. Okay, and that's he stopped the potential civil war. Here we have the southern kingdom gathering an army, 400,000 ish bachor, 400,000 people. The Yerovam from the northern kingdom, who we know is a lot bigger, he had 10 tribes, right? Arachimol milchama, he's preparing for war. Bishmonamot ish bachur giborei chayil. He has 800,000 soldiers. So now we have the north outnumbering the south 2-1. But we have over, according to this, sometimes Divrei Yamim may be exaggerating its numbers just for the effect. But let's buy into that effect. 1.2 million soldiers are about to go to war against each other. These are all Jews. Okay, why are they going to war against each other? What is the reason? What's the casus belli? What is the reason for this war?
I don't know.
I don't know either.
I don't know.
I don't know either. Certainly no causes mentioned here. And I think that's important. Like there may have been a war. There may have been reason. Okay, but the fact that the reason is not mentioned gives us the impression of like why.
Why?
Vayakom Aviyah me'al lahar Tzimraim asher behar Ephraim. He goes up on the mountain and he calls out on his megaphone, Vayomer Shma'uni Yerovam v'chol Yisrael. Hear ye, hear you, O northern kingdom and your king. Halo lachem ladat. Now he's bringing the reason. Ki Hashem Elohei Yisrael natan mamlacha leDavid al Yisrael leolam. You should know that God gave David a dynasty over Israel, kingship over Israel, forever. Lo uvanav brit melach, a covenant of salt. Salt is something that never disintegrates, never goes bad, right? Like salt and honey are the only two. That's why it's a preservative, right? Because it can last forever, right? So brit melach, a covenant of salt, means something that lasts forever. So God gave David an unconditional, forever promise. And now he's giving a little bit of history. Vayakom Yerovam ben Nevat, right? Your king, who he's here calling Eved Shlomo ben David, which is a little bit denigrating, right? He's talking to the legitimate king. Remember the Achia Shiloni, the Navi gave him this kingdom. He didn't take it over by rebellion, right? But he's calling him Shlomo's slave, which he was in the past, right? Vayimrod al Adonav, and he rebelled against his master, which he did, but again, in order, like we said, to fulfill God's plan of separating the kingdoms. Okay, so what happened? God gave David this promise. Yerovam, the lowly slave, rebelled against his master, which means, by implication, that what Yerovam did went against God's promise. Now he's framing Yerovam as a rebel not only against Shlomo, but also against God, right? Because if you're doing that, you're negating God's promise to David. Veikbetzu alav anashim reikim b'nei Belial, and gathered around Yerovam were all these no-goodniks, these people, these rednecks, these whatever. And remember that the person who put Yerovam on the throne was actually the Navi Achia Shiloni. Okay. Veitamtzu al Rechavam ben Shlomo, uRechavam haya na'ar v'rach levav v'lo itchazek lifnehem. What did they want from this poor Rechavam, who was just a lad of 41 years when he became king, right? And he wasn't strong enough to stand up to them. That's the history.
Well, you know that he wasn't strong enough because
he certainly wasn't strong.
When he made that terrible decision about taxing the 10 tribes.
He's not mentioning that.
He listened. No, I know, but we know from the other version.
Yeah.
That because he listened to his friends called Yeladim versus the Yoatzim, you know that he's not. Well,
like I said, politically, he's a very bad king.
Yeah. No, he wasn't strong. No, I'm not.
No, he's a weak king.
He was swayed.
That's all fine. Only here he's using it not to say Rechavam was a bad king, but to say you guys are bullies for picking on him.
Yeah. That is misken. He's a misken.
Yeah. Okay. So that's the background. And now he continues with his megaphone, Aviyam, and he says, Va'ata, now. Atem omrim li tchazek lifnei mamlechet Hashem biyad b'nei David. You want to strengthen yourself at the expense of the Davidic kingdom. Vatem hamon rav, and there's so many of you. Ve'imachem eglei zahav asher asa lachem Yerovam leElohim. And your side, let me list. If I'm listing, everybody's assets and whatever, what you have are these two illegitimate calves that Yerovam invented this religion. Okay, so not only are you going against the Davidic dynasty, but you're also going against God, and you're inventing this new. He's totally delegitimizing the northern. So that's the reason why he's going to war. Why is he going to war? According to this, according to what we're supposed to understand here, it's a holy war. He's standing up for God. He's standing up for God's promise to David. Nothing on his own, right? But he's standing up for God's promise to David, which you guys are trying to take away. He's standing up for God's religion, which you guys are following the wrong one, right? He's being a holy, right, zealot for God's what's called not purpose, cause, right? That sounds like that's why he's going to war. Hello, hidachtem et kohanei Hashem. You guys fired the real Kohanim, et bnei Aharon v'aleviim, right? The ones that are supposed to do all the ritual. V'tasu lachem kohanim ka'amei ha'aratzot, and you appoint, which is true, right? We heard about that in Melachim. You appointed for yourself as kohanim anybody, just like all the other goyim. Anybody who wants to be priest can be priest. Kol haba lemalei yado b'far ben bakar ve'elim shiva. Anybody who came and wants to do the sacrificial stuff, vayach kohen lelo Elohim, and he's a godless priest. Okay, so he's now totally dissing their religion. Va'anachnu, again, he may be right, but this is his cause for war. Va'anachnu, but we the holy ones, Hashem Eloheinu v'lo azavunu, God is a God, and we have not left him. V'chohanim mishartim la'Hashem, and we have real kohanim who serve God. Bnei Aharon v'aleviim b'melechet. Okay, we have the real stuff. We do it right. Umekatrim la'Hashem olot b'boker u'ba'erev va'erev, and we bring whatever incense like we're supposed to in the morning and in the evening. Uktoret samim u'marechet lechem ala shulchan ha'tahor u'menurat ha'zahav v'nerotea leva'er ba'erev ba'erev. A whole list of what they do in Beit HaMikdash. Ki shomrim anachnu mishmeret Hashem Eloheinu v'atem azavtem oto. Okay, we do what we're supposed to be doing. You left it. Now, the story with the meta story here. So I was talking about the story and the meta story. So the story we're talking about the whole time. This is Aviam's way of saying we're going to war because we have the just cause on our side, and we're standing up for God, and we're doing everything right. You're doing everything wrong. Fine. I just want to, for a second, go to the meta story behind this. And the meta story behind this is not so much what's going on here, but as I said, it's the agenda of the author of Sefer Divrei Yamim, who's here feeding us through all these descriptions of the Ktoret and the Nerot and the Menorah and all this stuff, who's feeding us, I think, the subliminal message, right, that when you serve when you have the legitimate ritual done in Beit HaMikdash, then God is on your side. Now, we have a lot of Nevi'im at the end of Bayit Rishon tell us that's not true, right? The Bein HaChavero is certainly, what God wants. He doesn't need all these sacrifices, right? What he does need, etc. We all know that, okay? But Divrei Yamim, remember, comes from a different perspective. And Divrei Yamim's goal is to kind of softly guide the people back into, yes, it's okay, and God does love you, and God does want you back, and the Brit is still on, and the Beit HaMikdash does have worth, and that, not to negate all the other stuff, right? But it's coming from a totally different perspective, okay? Beit Sheni also did not have idolatry. That was not so much of a thing, okay? That was Beit Rishon. Okay. V'hinei, and now he continues his speech. Hinei imanu berosh ha'elohim v'kohanav v'chatzotzrot ha'truah la'ariya lechem b'nei Yisrael. And here, I'm standing here, in the presence of God and the Kohanim, and we're warning you bnei Israel. Al tilachamu im Hashem Elohei avotechem ki lo tatzlichu. He's not warning them, don't fight against me. He's outnumbered 2-1, right? He's not fighting them, don't war against. But since God is on my side, and we know certainly throughout Tanakh that it doesn't matter how many numbers you have, right? It matters whether God is on your side. And if God is on your side and he decides you're going to win, you're going to win. And if God is not on your side, he decides you're going to lose, you're going to lose. It doesn't matter the numbers, okay? So he's saying, God is on my side. I'm warning you, don't fight against us. V'Yerovam hesevet ha'ma'arav lavo ma'acharehem. And now we have a little bit of military tactics. He's taking his rear guard and he's like sneaking them up behind. And okay, it's just a description of what he's doing. Vayu lifnei Yehuda v'ama'arav ma'acharehem. He's trying to box them in. Vayifnu Yehuda, and Yehuda, the people of Yerovam, Yerovam hesevet the northern king, right? He's creating this military tactic to try to gain the upper hand. Vayifnu Yehuda, and the kingdom of the south, the Aviam's kingdom, the speech person's kingdom, they turn around. Vihine, new information. Vihine lahem hamilchama panim v'achor. They are surrounded by, I hate to call it enemies, but they are surrounded by 2-1 of the enemy of the northern kingdom's people, right? They find themselves trapped. Vayitzaku laHashem, and they call out to God. V'akohanim mechatzitzrim mechatzitzrot, and the kohanim are blowing their trumpets, and like they're doing this whole thing. Vayariu ish Yehuda. Now, before I continue reading, Dina, I would like your input here. You've read enough Tanakh in your life. What do you think is going to happen? Is God going to be on their side, or is God not going to be on their side? Are they going to get out of it and win, or are they not going to get out and not win?
I think God's going to be on their side
Why?
because they're doing umekatrim laHashem alot baboker
Oh,
ba'erev.
but so you think it's true. So you think that as long as they're doing the Beit HaMikdash stuff, then God should be on their side. It didn't work for Beit Rishon.
This, if you look at this, I mean, if you look
Yeah.
at what's in Melachim,
Yeah.
that they're of the avodah
Then they
zarah,
should lose.
then
Then
they
they should lose. But
But in
according to
this
this, they
text-
should win.
should win. Yeah.
Okay, so let's see how we're gonna
Yeah.
fix that little problem there. Okay. Vayari Yehuda, Vayhi beharia ish Yehuda, and as they're blowing their trumpets, V'ha Elohim nigaf et Yerovam v'chol Yisrael ifnei Aviya v'Yehuda. Good guess. God defeats the north. Vayanusu bnei Yisrael mipnei Yehuda. Right, the northern kingdom flees, retreats. Vayitnem Elohim be'adam, and God gives the south victory over the north. And let's hear the bottom line of this war. Vayaku bahem Aviyav amo makaraba. They smite them mightily. Vayiplu chalalim mi'Yisrael. How many people were killed in the north? 500,000 ish bachor. 500,000 people, 500,000 people, which I will talk about in a minute. Veikanu bnei Israel ba'etahi, and they surrender the north. Veyamtzu bnei Yehuda, kinoshanu al Hashem Elohei avotehem. Kinishanu al Hashem Elohei, and bnei Yehuda were strong. They won. They overcame because they leaned upon Hashem, the God of their fathers. Vayodof Aviyah achrei Yerovam, and the king of the south runs after the king of the north. He pursues him. Vayilkod mimeno arim, and he captures cities from the north. Et Beit El, remember where the shrine is, so that's their religious center, or one of their two main religious centers. Et Beit El vet benotea, and all the cities all the villages surrounding Beit El. Ve'et Yeshana vet benotea, another city. Ve'et Ephron ubnotea, another city. Velo atzar koach Yerovam od bimei aviu veinagfeu Hashem veyamot. And Yerovam, throughout the rest of his reign, could no longer stop whatever. He no longer had any power over the southern kingdom, and God smote him, and he died.
So this whole story is not told in Melachim.
We're going to see what happens in Melachim, but I wanted this as the background.
Okay.
Okay. let's say like this, okay? How would you sum this up? And when I say sum up, my number one question whenever I'm doing any Tanakh reading is good or bad for the Jews? Is this not of the Jews, not for the Jews? Is this a good evaluation or bad evaluation? Is this something that we're happy about, not happy about? Is this something that God would applaud or not applaud? Is this a good outcome, a bad outcome?
It's very sad. If a 500,000, I think the number is exaggerated, but if it's sad, if a civil war, and if a 500,000 Jews from the Northern Kingdom are dead, the situation
Not only
is not
dead,
nice.
killed by the Southern
Killed by
Kingdom.
the
We don't hear
Southern.
about a single casualty from the Southern Kingdom, by the way.
So
Well, let me point something
it's
else
a
out.
horrible story.
Let me
It's
point something else out. In Pasuk
Yeah.
Zayin, when we hear Vayaku bahem avia vamo makaraba, right? This comes after Vayanusu bnei Yisrael mipnei Yehuda.
also they ran after them. Yeah.
Right. In other words, in order to win this war, they didn't need to fire a single shot. They won the war. These
Well,
ran away. They were in defeat, right? They were certainly no threat. There was no military threat. Okay. Avia decided to wage this war. We don't know why, but according to Divrei Yamim, it's to uphold God's honor, let's say, so to speak, right? You get the impression that if that's what he was after, there's a little bit of overzealousness here in killing. He did not have to kill 500,000 people in order to prove his point. Just the fact that God gave him that victory and they fled and whatever, that should have been enough. And let me point out something else which is not explicit here, but it's certainly implicit. Vayilkod mimenu arim et Beit El ve'et bnotea. He captured Beit El. And what did he do with Beit El?
it's Benotea. I don't know.
Bnotea just means in the surrounding villages.
Oh,
What did he do with the Beit El that he captured?
et Yishana, Benotea.
No, then that's the list. 3 cities in there. We
Below
don't know. Nothing.
Atzar. No,
Now,
it's below
if
Atzar.
if idolatry, like he's saying, was such a bad thing, and the religion of the south, of the north, was such a bad thing, you'd think it would say, "Vayilkod mina et Beit El vayisrafeh be'esh," or something. And we know we're going to see throughout Melachim, Beit El and the Mizbeach and Beit El continue to exist. So if you're such a righteous king fighting for God, why are you leaving this? Unless this is not a religious problem. And if it's not a religious problem, then what's this whole speech of that basically gave you an excuse to kill 500,000 people for what? Okay, so
Well,
you don't.
he wanted control over the
So you don't get what he did gain. He did gain some, like he moved the border a few kilometers north. That he did gain out of this war. Is it justified? Even from the agenda of Baal Divrei Yamim, it's hard to say. It's hard to justify this. In other words, I think Aviam comes out looking bad here.
Well, I think that the fact that the writer of the Divrei Yamim said that 500,000 men were killed, I think is a judgment. It's definitely
Is a judgment. I totally agree. Let me just show you one more trick pasuk here. V'lo atzar koach Yerovam od b'mei avio, and which I loosely translate of, and Yerovam could no longer have any power over Aviam. Okay, whatever. Vayigafeu Hashem vayamot, and God struck him, smote him, and he died.
He's punished.
Who?
Yeravam.
How do you know?
Because that's what he's talking about. V'lo atzar koach Yeravam od b'mei avio vayigfu. It seems like
It seems like that. It seems like that. According to, I'm just bringing up that according to the Yerushalmi, it's Aviam that's talked about at the end. In other words, that's the Yerushalmi's way of saying, at the end of the day, Aviam was punished for all this.
Oh, okay.
Okay, so all these slight ambiguities, like we had before, is the author's way of kind of tricking us to say, maybe it was Yerovam, but as far as we're concerned, it should have been Aviam or something like that.
Oh,
okay, so I think that's another judgment.
Okay.
Okay, good. We got through all that scary parak, but since we started a little bit, and it's the end of the time now, but since we started a little bit late and we had a little, I'm going to go for a few more psukim, if that's okay with you.
Good.
Okay. So let's go back to Melachim. You asked if that's what happened in Melachim. Let's see what happens in Melachim, or at least let's get a little bit into it. Okay. Now we're going back to Melachim. Umilchama hayta ben Rechavam uven Yerovam kol yimei chayav. This is a little bit of a, I don't know if it's an anachronism, if it's a misprint. Probably we're talking about Aviyam and not Rechavam. Rechavam already died in the previous parak, and we're talking about Aviyam. So let's just smooth it over and not get too upset about it, and assume we're talking about this milchama between Aviyam and Yerovam, which perhaps echoes the animosity between Yerochavam and Yerovam. Whatever. Okay, I'm not going to get into that. V'yeter divrei Aviyam, and all the rest of the stories of Aviyam, v'chol asher asa, and everything he did, halom ktuvim al sefer divrei hayamim l'malchei Yehuda. So everything else that he did, we know, is written on the Sefer Divrei Hayamim that we don't have, right? Not our Divrei Hayamim, like we said, the Chronicles that we don't have. Umilchama hayta ben Aviyam uven Yerovam, and there was war between Aviyam uven Yerovam. Vayishkav Aviyam avotav, and he died, and they laid him to rest. They buried him be'ir David, v'imloch asa beno tachtav. The end. That's the story that we get in Melachim. Okay, so
How do you feel when you see that the Divrei Hayamim gives so much more information than here?
Yafe. As I said, Divrei Hayamim, I don't know if they invent things, or maybe they did have access to this Sefer Divrei Hayamim Melachei Yehuda, and for whatever reason, Sefer Melachim did not want to mention this whole, the technicalities of the war. It is, and
I want to mention it because it's so terrible.
Exactly. So maybe I'm saying maybe it didn't exist, or we don't know. I don't know. Whatever it is, we take it as a given that the Divrei Hayamim either makes it up or has its own sources or whatever. I don't want to spend the whole semester trying to justify that. So that being aside, okay. Now if we're looking at Sefer Melachim, and Sefer Melachim did not see fit to give us all of that. I would like to go back. I'm going back up here. The last thing that we saw in Sefer Melachim about Aviyam, right? Which is, where is it? Sorry. Vayelech b'chol chatot aviv asher asa lefanav v'lo hayah elbavo shalem Hashem Elokav kedadar le'ilamo. Right. That is the evaluation that Sefer Melachim has about Aviyam. Okay. If I had to justify this whole class of this whole issue, I would say that Sefer Melachim wants to point out religious sins. Aviyam, according to Sefer Melachim, has religious sins. Maybe what were these chatim? I don't know. Lo yashalem im Hashem Elohav. That's religious, but if you're comparing to David, I don't know. There was something bad about Aviyam, and Sefer Melachim would like to cast it as a religious sin, but there's no real something to hold on to there. Now, if you gave the whole story that we had in Sefer Divrei Hayamim, and Aviyam comes out, at least proclaims that he's doing this for God reasons, that should make Aviyam sound like a good king. And he's not a good king. He's a bad king. He killed 500,000 people from the north. But that's not something I think that Sefer Melachim at this point wants to stress. Of course it's terrible, okay? But right now we're still on the agenda of, are you a good Jew or a bad Jew? Not are you a good person or a bad person? Not are you a good king or a bad king? Right? Do you put on tzitzis in the morning or don't you? Right? And you get the impression that Aviyam did. But you get the impression that Sefer Melachim doesn't want to give him any credit for that, but can't come outright and say, you're a Machal Shabbos if he's not. So it's going to give us the kind of abbreviated, encrypted Look at David Aviv and Kol Chatel Aviv and whatever. And I would like to say that the real story here is what happens in maybe exaggerated. Okay, you have enough of a basis to hear that Melchama Ita ben Aviyam. So we know that there's some sort of a war. Again, the numbers may be totally crazy, but I think we are both justified in getting that gut feeling that even Sefer Divrei Yamim is really, despite all the God speeches, is really criticizing Aviyam for doing that.
Yeah, and I don't think they would make up this story from nothing. You know,
That's because you haven't read enough of Divrei Yamim. We're going to see
I know
stories.
I studied Divrei Yamim,
The reason I'm saying that is because of all the times that Divrei Yamim contradicts, not adds. So one of them is making up something.
They contradict the.
Yeah, sometimes you have contradiction, and then it's harder to say, I don't think he made it up.
No, but the most difficult point when I studied Divrei Yamim was leaving out Yetziat Mitzrayim. I mean, it's such a pivotal part of our history. And
you know what? There's that one parak in Tehillim, I forget which one, Ein Chet, I think maybe, that gives us a whole history of Am Yisrael from Avram Avinu until, and it has everything. It has Mitzrayim, everything except for Ma'amad Har Sinai.
Go figure.
Go figure. Exactly.
Good.
Tough. I hope our lives.
Thank you, and I'm sorry. I'm sorry that I
No. I'm glad you're here
with this. Okay. I hope to see you again.
God willing, next week.
Yes,
Have
I hope to. Bye bye.
Bye bye.